Have you ever wished that you could play Alien Isolation with climbing? Wait, you haven't? Well, tough cookies, that's what you've got, and you're going to enjoy it. I'm joking. This game isn't that at all, and also isn't very enjoyable. I have no idea why I keep seeing people say that this game is like Alien Isolation with climbing. Not one part of this game feels like Alien Isolation in any way. Although it does have climbing, that is a 50% success rate. I am a fan of Don't Nod. They don't always strike gold, but I find the majority of their games enjoyable in some way. Unfortunately, they have very much found the opposite of gold with Aphelion, a game I was really looking forward to that ends up being a boring slog, with tedious gameplay and a yawn-inducing story. Why is the game so disappointing? Let's start with what sort of game it is. Aphelion is a story-driven adventure game where you spend the majority of your time exploring this frozen alien planet, searching for your partner after the two of you crash land. This is not an action game, it's not really a survival horror game either, and despite the occasional stealth sequence, it's much closer to a sort of cinematic climbing game than anything else. Do not go into Aphelion expecting any semblance of horror, because I really think that something has given the wrong impression with this game. The whole setup of searching for your missing partner while some alien creature stalks you across a planet sounds like the beginning of a sci-fi horror game, but that just isn't what this is. The creature, which the game calls Nemesis, doesn't even actually show up until around a third of the way through the game, and once it does, all of its encounters are heavily scripted. You are never being actively stalked, there's usually one correct path, one correct distraction, one correct solution, so instead of feeling like you're actually being hunted, almost every single sequence with the Nemesis just feels like either trial and error, or just getting it right the first time, just trial. The frustrating thing though is that there actually could have been some interesting ideas here that they sort of touched on, but then didn't fully commit to. There's one mechanic you learn where the Nemesis is blind. What an interesting and innovative idea that nobody has ever done before. That means that stepping into water will alert it to your position because obviously its hearing's great, which sounds like it could be a cool idea. For about 30 seconds it is, but then almost every other encounter will resolve itself in the exact same way. You will find an anomaly, you will use that to distract the creature, and then you will move past it or through the water or whatever while it investigates the noise. That is it. That every single encounter with the Nemesis works out like that. That repetition is a real problem, especially in the final third of the game, because suddenly these encounters are just constant, they are non-stop, and even though they aren't hard, they're just boring. You've seen everything that will happen with this creature by maybe the third or fourth time you see it, and it's just, why? For a fairly short and linear game, Aphelion really starts repeating itself way too quickly. Every time Nemesis appears on screen, you just sigh. The creature itself, I mean, I guess it looks fairly cool. The visual design is decent enough. There are a couple of moments where the lighting might help it stand out and whatever, but in terms of actually feeling threatening or intimidating, it just does not do that. Part of this does come down to how scripted the encounters really are, and part of it comes down to the game refusing to escalate the mechanics in a meaningful way. Nemesis ends up just being a recurring obstacle, which is a shame because there is definitely the foundation for a much stronger stealth game hidden in there, but Aphelion just never really builds to it. As far as I can tell, I don't think Aphelion actually ever marketed itself as a horror game, but I think it should have been one. If they'd fully committed to doing that, then I think that would have been quite interesting, but obviously Don't Nod, to my knowledge, haven't made a horror game before. But before we move on to the puzzles, if you are enjoying this video so far, then may I interest you in a cheeky subscribe, as we are trying to hit 2,500 subscribers by the end of the year. Thank you very much. But now, the puzzles unfortunately don't do much either, mostly because the game once again repeats the same solution structure over and over again to the point where you will solve the puzzle before you even start doing it. Almost every puzzle in Aphelion follows the exact same rhythm. You walk to an area, realise you can't progress, you pull out your scanner, you find the anomaly, you stand at the right angle, you scan the anomaly, and then the path opens. That is pretty much every puzzle in the game. The problem isn't that the puzzles are easy, which they obviously are, but puzzles can still be fun when they're easy. The problem is that it doesn't evolve at all. Once you understand how the scanner works, which you very easily will, then you've seen pretty much all the game has to offer mechanically. There were multiple points where I genuinely thought the game was going to try something new, and then it just doesn't. The sections where you play as Thomas are probably the closest the game gets to actual tense gameplay and interesting puzzles, due to the fact that his oxygen tank is damaged, meaning you are suddenly working under a time limit while solving the puzzles and navigating the environment. And to be fair, the oxygen depletes way quicker than I expected it to. There were a lot of moments where I actually kind of started panicking a little bit because I hadn't figured out the puzzle immediately and I was suddenly running out of air. The game really should have lent into this kind of thing more, because the added pressure immediately makes these otherwise boring sections a lot more interesting, because now there's some urgency behind what you're doing. But again, the game doesn't capitalise on that idea. The puzzles themselves are still incredibly basic. Most of the time you're just pulling an object down or interacting with something, and that is it, trying to get to the next oxygen canister thing. There's barely any room for experimentation or problem solving because the solutions are always extremely obvious. So even though the oxygen mechanic adds tension, the actual puzzles underneath it still feel really shallow. And look, I am not a puzzle guy. I hate puzzles in games. I often get stuck on puzzle with games. It's not the fact that I'm way too smart for the game. If I'm having zero trouble with your puzzles are too easy. And this is sort of a recurring frustration I had with Aphelion as a whole. It keeps introducing ideas that sound promising and then refuses to push them even further. But the bulk of Aphelion is climbing. And when I say the bulk, I really do mean about 80% of the game is climbing. You are climbing constantly. You climb up walls with conveniently, snowed ledges, shimmy across cliffs, jump between handholds, squeeze through gaps, use the winch to grapple every now and then repeat that process for hours. There isn't much mechanical depth to it, and to be fair, the climbing itself functions perfectly fine. I never had a major issue with the controls or anything like that. Ariane and Thomas generally go where you want them to go. The animations are smooth enough. The traversal has that cinematic style that sort of fits this story-driven game in the cinematic sense that I quite liked. But this should come as no surprise. I'm not complaining that the game has climbing in it. I knew what this game was going in. I played just on. I don't mind climbing. The problem is that the game relies on climbing so heavily while doing very little to evolve it at all. After a while, I started feeling like I was less exploring this planet and just going up a very expensive climbing wall, which makes it even more frustrating when the game briefly introduces good ideas and then immediately abandons them, which it does a few times. Early on, there is a sequence where you need to carefully walk across a frozen lake without breaking the ice beneath you. This section is great. Suddenly, movement matters. You had to slow down. You've got to pay attention to where you're going, look at the cracks, make sure you're not moving too quick. There was actual tension because the environment itself felt dangerous, like the game was pushing back. For a few minutes, Aphelion suddenly felt much more dynamic because the traversal had an actual mechanic attached to it beyond just climb. And then the game almost never does this again. That became such a recurring feeling for me while playing Aphelion. It constantly just brushes past more interesting ideas without committing to them at all. The Ice Storm section is another really good example. During these sequences, you have to move between bits of cover whilst climbing because staying exposed to the storm for too long will freeze you to death. So now there's actual pressure behind the traversal. You can't just climb at your own pace anymore because the environment is once again actively trying to kill you. But once again, Aphelion barely does enough with the idea. The section lasts about 10 minutes and then it's done. And this just makes the whole game so frustrating in a mechanical sense. There are flashes of good ideas all over the place. The frozen lake, the oxygen management, the ice storms, the sound-based stealth. But almost every mechanic feels like it's introduced and then implemented in the most bare-bones way possible instead of trying to actually evolve it and make the mechanics reach their full potential. But gameplay aside, my biggest disappointment with Aphelion is actually the story, which really hurts me to say, because this is exactly the kind of game where the story needs to carry the experience. If you're going to be so surface level mechanically, the story simply has to carry the other side of the load. And it doesn't. The setup itself is perfectly fine. Ariane and Thomas crash land on this planet, get separated during the accident, and spend most of the game trying to reunite with each other or survive. Ariane is searching for Thomas, while Thomas is just trying to live after being injured during the crash, and obviously, as we mentioned before, his oxygen tank is broken. That setup is completely fine, but the issue is that the game expects you to care so deeply about these characters without giving you enough material to become attached to them in the first place. We are constantly told that these two care about each other, but we barely get enough meaningful interaction between them to actually feel that ourselves. A lot of their relationship is just explained through dialogue rather than shown through actual moments together. One of, if not the first thing you are ever taught when you're doing a sort of creative writing course or anything like that, is to show, not tell. The game keeps telling us how important they are to one another, but there aren't enough scenes where it's shown, and because of that, several of the, quote, bigger emotional scenes just don't land. The game clearly wants certain moments to hit hard, but it doesn't earn them beforehand. One of my big pet peeves with stories is when a game will introduce some really big, dramatic, emotional moment in its final third, but did not do the groundwork beforehand to make that moment hit hard. You're cheating. You're giving the answer without providing your working out here. I also don't think that Ariane or Thomas are especially interesting on their own. Neither character gets enough opportunity to show much personality outside of the immediate survival situation. Most of the time they speak, they're speaking to each other or sort of in a audio journal thing, but most of the time it's just pure exposition, concern for one another, or explaining what they're about to do, which means that neither of them end up feeling pretty distinct. They have no defining characteristics. And then there's the broader mystery surrounding the planet itself, which honestly didn't do anything for me at all. The story does keep hinting at sort of bigger revelations and strange discoveries. Obviously, this is an alien planet. You can do whatever you like here from a creative writing standpoint. The planet doesn't exist. It's pure fiction. You can make this planet as interesting as you want. But they don't. I was never fascinated by what was happening on this planet. I was mostly just waiting for the game to give me a reason to care, and it never did, which is a huge problem for a game this focused on its narrative. If the story is going to be the main driving force behind the experience, which, given the limitations of the gameplay, it definitely was intended to be, it needs stronger characters, it needs stronger dialogue, and a mystery that actually pulls you through the simple gameplay. Aphelion never finds that hook, and the frustrating thing is, I am absolutely the target audience for this kind of game. Scroll through my channel. I love short, linear, story-driven games. Give me a 5 to 8 hour sci-fi adventure with a strong atmosphere and good characters, and I will be there. I cannot stress enough how much I am the target audience for this game. So this isn't me disliking the genre or wanting the game to be something much more action-focused or whatever. I was completely on board with what Aphelion was trying to be. I just don't think it executes any of its ideas well enough. The gameplay mechanics are too repetitive, the stealth never evolves, the puzzles never challenge you, and the story never gives Ariane and Thomas enough depth for the bigger moments to land. And honestly, coming from Don't Nod, that disappointment really cuts deep into my soul. This is a studio I have always had a soft spot for, because even when their games don't fully come together, they usually try interesting ideas or experiment with different genres or styles. They take risks. I'm telling you now, go look through every game that Don't Nod has ever made, and you might be surprised. You'll be like, wait, they made that game and they made that game. They're completely different. They try new things. Sometimes it works and sometimes it doesn't. But I'll always respect a studio that's willing to branch out and attempt something different instead of making the same game forever. That's why Aphelion is such a shame to me, because you can see glimpses of stronger ideas hidden throughout the game. The oxygen mechanic, the ice storm, the sound-based stealth, all that stuff. There are pieces here that could have been good, but the game never pushes any of them far enough. Every mechanic, every story beat, every interesting concept feels like it stops right before it reaches the point where it could have gotten good. So I don't hate Aphelion at all. I actually think there is a decent foundation underneath it, but the game that we actually got from a studio I like this much just isn't good enough, and I came away really disappointed that it never became more than just okay. If you made it this far into the video, thank you very much. If you enjoyed the video, then leaving a like would really help me out, or maybe even a comment telling me you enjoyed the video. We have recently enabled memberships on the channel, so if you want to support the content and get early access to new videos, then you can, but there's no pressure whatsoever. I upload at least one video a week, so make sure to subscribe. Have a lovely day, and goodbye.